everyone. Welcome to iHouse. My name is Gina Sutherland. I'm one of the program interns here at iHouse for this year. And a global forum is a space for any topic in the international sphere. And I'll be passing the microphone off to Dr. Brown, who's starting today's event. So thank you for coming.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And Eid Mubarak to everyone who is celebrating here and around the world. My name is Saiba Verma, and I'm a member of the steering committee of the South Asia Initiative and the director of the South Asian Studies minor at UCSD. I want to first thank everyone who helped make this event possible, our partners at the iHouse, Julian and Adam, and all of the interns. Thank you so much for your care and enthusiasm. I want to thank my colleague Prashant Bhardwaj. Where are you? Yeah, thank you. Prashant's really responsible for this event today and put in so much hard work. And then the members of the South Asia Initiative Steering Committee and our undergrad coordinators who are over there, Tavisha, Kritika, and Bhavika. Thank you so much. It's my honor to welcome you all to our third annual Uma and Ashis Nandy Forum, generously funded by the Gulistan Endowment for South Asia and the Trivedi family. Over his 60-year career, Professor Ashis Nandy has fearlessly spoken truth to power, often at significant personal and professional costs. As he once said in an interview, confronting evil means facing it without blinking. Our community here in San Diego recently suffered a horrific tragedy with the fatal killing of 3 people at the Islamic Center. The attack sent waves of grief, fear, and anger through our community, but equally furious calls to come together to condemn the hateful rhetoric against Muslims and celebrate the precious lives lost. As tributes have poured in, many of us have been struck by the profound insight, courage, and wisdom that they have offered, facing evil without winking. In a 1996 essay called Bearing Witness to the Future, Professor Nandy cautioned that even in open democratic societies, ordinary citizens have been given political rights only mechanically. They are neither allowed to participate in defining the goals of a society, nor are their visions of desirable societies taken seriously by the ruling elite, except as part of electoral calculations. For Nandy, the question of rights has always been about expressing dissent and widening human choices, identifying and understanding social pathologies, and linking up the fates of different polities and societies through envisioning their common fears and hopes. To have rights means being able to challenge existing ideas of what is normal, what is sane, and what is objective. We hope that the Uma and Ashis Nandy Forum, that through this forum we're able to contribute in meaningful ways to this vision. I want to give a quick rundown of today's events. So our speaker, Al-Kapradhan, will speak for about 45 minutes, after which we'll have about 20-25 minutes for Q&A. We ask that everyone please be mindful of our community principles and allow the speaker their allotted time without interruptions. During the Q&A, we will have a moderator and 2 students with microphones who will be on either side of the aisles. And so since this event is being recorded, we ask that you please use the mic to ask your questions. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Professor David Fitzgerald to the stage to introduce our speaker. Professor Fitzgerald is the T.E. Gilgred Chair in U.S.-Mexican Relations and an honorary chair in Refugee Studies in the Department of Sociology at UCSD. He's written and published extensively on questions of racial citizenship, rights, and migration. His 2014 book, Culling the Masses, The Democratic Origins of Racist Immigration Policy in the Americas, won multiple awards, including the American Sociological Association's Distinguished Scholarly Book Award. Please welcome Dr. Fitzgerald to the stage.
Good afternoon, thanks very much. We're fortunate to be joined today by Alka Pradhan. She is an expert on human rights and humanitarian law in counterterrorism settings, the impact of torture on fair trials, targeted killing drone programs, and the treatment of detainees. Her experience as a litigator, an advocate, a consultant, includes work with the US government, the parliaments of the UK and the EU, the UN, as well as the International Criminal Court. She is currently Human Rights Counsel at the Guantanamo Bay Military Commissions and has represented litigants in the 9/11 case. She holds a JD from Columbia and is adjunct professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. The UCSD South Asia Initiative is honored to welcome her as part of its UMA and Ashis Nandy annual forum. She'll be speaking on Worst of the Worst, From Guantanamo to ICE, The Long War on Rights. Please join me in welcoming Alka Pradhan.
Where I need to pull out my reading glasses. All right, well, many thanks to Professor Bhardwaj and Varma for the invitation, to the UCSD South Asia Initiative for organizing, UC San Diego International House and South Asian Bar Association of San Diego for co-sponsoring. I'm really very privileged to be here. My name is Alka Pradhan. I'm a human rights attorney based in Washington, D.C. My primary work has been as defense counsel at the Guantanamo Bay Military Commissions and at the International Criminal Court. But I have previously represented civilian no-strike victims and other Guantanamo detainees who we were getting cleared and negotiating their releases, and we'll hear a little bit about that. I'm an adjunct professor at Penn, and among the actually biggest highlights of my career so far is being named a global ambassador by the Korea Democracy Foundation, which is a role that has really pushed me to conceptualize how democratic norms are being subverted and promoted in comparative situations. So, let's see. There we go. So this slide I am obligated to show every time I speak publicly. It's actually quite funny because I am technically an employee of the Department of Defense. And we're going to talk about a lot about calling people and things and people and concepts by their proper names. And it is legally the Department of Defense. It is not the Department of War, no matter what anyone tries to rebrand it as. But even the Department of Defense, I have to show you this disclaimer because the US government wants to make very clear that nothing I say, and I would like to make very clear that nothing I say ever represents the opinion of the Department of Defense, ever. And nothing I say, of course, should be taken to confirm or deny anything that the United States government considers to be classified as important for the security. So I have to tell you that. I cannot tell you how honored I am to have been asked to join you today as a proud Indian and American, someone who spent years studying South Asia alongside law and political science, the rise of authoritarianism around the world, and the corresponding diminishment of rights. It means so much to me, it really does, to be here speaking to you, and particularly under the auspices of UMA and Ashis Nandy. This year is the 25th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Some of us remember where we were on that day, but a generation, and I see you, a generation has grown up in the aftermath. I went to law school a few years after 9/11, just after Gitmo opened, and just as the first reports of black site torture were beginning to come out. A lot of friends of mine from college went on to become doctors or businessmen, and many friends from law school went to great firms working on new technology, mergers and acquisitions, all great things. I returned to 9/11, and I spend nearly every day of my life in some part of 9/11. I stand in a courtroom at Guantanamo speaking to a judge about the horrifying torture of my client, Amar, showing classified photos from 2006 of headphones and blindfolds duct taped around his head And I walk out of the courtroom and I open my phone and I see photographs of Maduro being brought to New York with headphones and blindfolds duct taped around his head. Through absolutely no talent of my own, I am weirdly, uniquely qualified to kind of draw these straight lines between what we have allowed to happen over 25 years and what we are sort of now allowing to happen. And we'll talk a little bit about what dissent means. And I want to highlight the irony of us saying, as doubtless many of you will hear in the lead up to the anniversary, that they hate us for our freedoms, while systematically spending 25 years dismantling freedoms and subverting the rule of law around the world, not just here. And so in particular, I will spend my time, these are a lot of things I'm going to talk about. In particular, I will spend my time talking about the phenomenon that contributed to our tacit acceptance of these bad acts. And sort of the starting point in my mind was, and continues to be, the opportunistic use of language by the US government to subdue dissent. So you've all heard of Dante's 9 Circles of Hell, right? So with great humility in the reference, I would like to introduce you to the 9 Circles of National Security Fascism. This is particular to the post-9/11 era, and while this model of weaponizing euphemisms is specific to the US, you will recognize many of these practices from history and in recent conflicts. So the first circle is, that's the 9th circle for other wars, we'll get to that. The first circle is terrorism being called war. I'm not going to make this overly legal. I won't spend a lot of time on the distinction between international armed conflict between states and non-international armed conflict between states and non-state actors. But I want to say this. Prior to 2001, the international community of states vocally, vociferously, including the United States, agreed that no non-state actor could declare war on a state on their own. Okay? It would be giving too much power to the non-state actor. It would place it on the level of a state, which states, just by declaration or by a single act, can declare war on another state, right? We put boots on the ground in Venezuela, we declare war on Venezuela. Terrorists, or alleged terrorists, were never ever to be considered combatants in a war. They were to be treated as criminals, prosecuted under domestic laws or special criminal tribunals. To call them combatants would be, in the minds of states, right, in the post-World War II era, would be to legitimize their cause. And the law of war was written specifically to exclude acts of terrorism. So here on the left side of the slide, you see a quote from the very famous case, Prosecutor versus Tadic, from the Yugoslav Criminal Tribunal. It was the 1997 decision, where you could see the restatement of this principle from the law of war that distinguishes an armed conflict from banditry, etc., and terrorist activities, which are not subject to the law of war. And on the right, you see there's a declaration from Ambassador David Schuffer, who's former global ambassador at large from the State Department for War Crimes, who wrote a declaration in my case on behalf of my client, that in which he calls the government's sloppy drafting of the military commission's charge sheets as trying to fit the square peg of terrorism into the circular hole of the law of war. Now, why does this matter, right? Why am I giving you a lecture on it? What changed post-9/11? War is, as you know, it is legalized killing, right? You can kill the enemy, you can kill civilians as collateral damage, right? Legally, if you're in a war. You can hold detainees all the way until the end of the war. The United States realized that a war paradigm post-9/11 allowed for maximum targeting, detaining, and killing. But war paradigms also generally, as I said, elevate the fighters, so they have highly regulated rights and privileges under the Geneva Conventions. The US solution was to invent a category out of thin air, which has morphed over time, but is now called unprivileged enemy belligerents. It doesn't actually mean anything except you get maximum targeting ability by abusing the law of war, but you get to apply minimum rights, because IHL combatants and civilian rights do not apply, do not include this new category. So that's a quick overview without getting too legal, but keep this in mind as we go forward. The very first thing we did, the very first circle, is government intentionally using the word war for terrorism. So, what's the second circle? Second circle, if you say it's a war, then you can imprison or detain the worst of the worst. Now, looking at this phrase, worst of the worst, right? It is kind of nonsensical, right? Like, worst of the worst, what? People, enemies, foreigners, maybe. Do you remember why this phrase was coined post 9/11? Some of us remember. This photo is actually why. And a lot of you are familiar with this photograph. It's one of the first photographs taken at Guantanamo Bay after the first detainees were brought there from Afghanistan. Guantanamo Bay Naval Station, right? It's a real place. It's been there for a long time. In 1898, U.S. Marines took the land around the bay during the Spanish American War as a part of Cuba's fight for independence. And then we coerced our way into controlling the territory for an annual rent, which we haven't cashed those checks in a while out of protest, but we do pay that. And that territorial control, not owning the land, but controlling it very close to the United States, outside the reach of Cuban law, is what made it so attractive post 9/11 to an administration looking for a legal black hole. And the legal black hole, those are not my words. Those are the words of former Bush administration officials who confirmed many times over. You can look up some of the statements of William Lietzau, who's a former Bush administration official, who used to work on detainee affairs, that they were looking for a place where U.S. constitutional protections would not apply to the terror suspects that they wanted to hold, that they were bringing over from the war in Afghanistan, from CIA black sites, and then later Iraq. The first detainees were brought in on January 11th, 2002 from Afghanistan, and it may surprise some of you to know that, especially my younger friends, that there was a real outcry that when the first images and headlines broke from Guantanamo, including this brutal one, that we were opening an offshore prison camp solely for these brown, Muslim, non-citizen men. The government needed to justify it fast because these images were not doing them any good. And so then, from then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld comes this phrase, worst of the worst. Relax, everyone. Guantanamo is only going to imprison the worst of the worst. The people who the government says helped attack the United States just a few months earlier. Now, the government knew at that time, when he made that statement, and it was confirmed by senior DoD officials just a few months later in 2002, that in fact most of the men they had at Guantanamo, including almost this entire group, had nothing to do with September 11th. They were being wrongly held at Guantanamo. General Dunleavy famously went to Afghanistan to complain about the fact that there were no actual Al-Qaeda members or anyone associated with 9/11 coming to Guantanamo. But the propaganda machine had started, and Guantanamo was turning out to be a useful little holding place while we sort of thrashed around the world collecting more detainees. Now, these photos, like so many others, were eventually splashed across news pages, usually like this, in a grid. When you look at them like this, what do you see? What do you see? You see people of color, many of the men of color, right? Many of them bearded, some smiling, some looking grim. I remember the news anchor in 2004 describing her as menacing. Okay? So these are 10 of my clients. People I have sat with over the years, talked to, eaten with, told them stories about my kids, my daughters. These are men who have been systematically dehumanized, right? There's one here captured as a child, he was under 18. He grew his hair out into big curls to make his mother laugh in the ICRC photos that were sent to her. He died a few years after his release from medical issues stemming from his torture at Guantanamo. There's another who spent years writing love letter after love letter to his wife back home, begging her, I would have to like take these out with me, begging her to wait for him while we tried desperately to have him cleared for release and then eventually negotiate his release to a country that wouldn't torture him. And that was the problem, somewhere where he wouldn't be tortured and where she could join him, which is always kind of hard. And instead, the US government sent him back to his country. He was disappeared for 8 months upon arrival. And by the time he was thankfully released and not killed, his wife had given up hope and moved to another country. Another one lost his young son in the Syrian war while he was at Guantanamo. He arrived at Guantanamo with existing back problems. He was beaten up regularly. His ribs were broken by the Joint Task Force, the guards at Guantanamo. And he was force-fed hundreds of times over the course of his few years at Guantanamo. We had to litigate to force the Department of Defense to let him use a wheelchair because he couldn't walk, and so they just drag him. Like there are videos I have seen that I'm not allowed to show you because they're so classified that I can describe them for you, where they're holding him by his arms and just dragging him, broken back and all, out of his cell. Right? To litigate to get a wheelchair. Now, were all of these people fans of the United States before they arrived at Guantanamo? Probably not. Maybe not. Maybe some of them were. Maybe some of them weren't. Were most of them ever involved in any action against the United States? No. But if they were, right, and I'm not saying none of them were not, if they were, does that justify the systematic dehumanization and disapplication of our vaunted justice system to them? Very much no. So this is the second circle, right? Using that phrase, worst of the worst, to dehumanize these people, convince the general public and international allies that their detention is justified, and place them outside of any applicable law. So now we have the third circle. If you're saying it's a war, you can detain or hold them until the war is over. And if you're saying you're only holding the worst of the worst in a war on terror that will never end, you can hold them forever, which is actually the official position of the United States government, that they can hold these people forever. The United States government still calls Guantanamo a detention facility for suspected terrorists. Even those who are cleared for release, who belong cleared for release, are labeled no longer enemy combatants, NLEC is the phrase that is applied to them, which would be defamation for most of them if they could sue the US government. They can't. But you know what it really is? What many experts have called it since it was opened? It's a concentration camp. And I want to show you these quotations from Andrea Pitzer and Leighton Buell, who are specialists, who are experts in concentration camps through history. Andrea points out that throughout history, being a foreigner or being seen as a terrorist are the two quickest ways you can get swept into most of these camp systems. And Leighton Buell, speaking specifically about Guantanamo, says, sort of highlights the fact, right, that concentration camps have always been designed at the most basic level to separate one group from another group, usually because, you say they're dangerous or undesirable, and so then you separate them from everyone else, and then you can do whatever you like to them. One of the young lieutenants actually staffing this camp, as the United States government is framing it as essential for national security, warping the laws of war, and standardizing the official use of torture, is a young Pete Hegseth, my boss, guys. We see under the first Trump administration, and certainly more recently under the second, the rejuvenation of that phrase, worst of the worst, right? Because we allowed the phrase to be used on the men I just showed you, without really questioning the use of the camps. It is now used on these people. So, these are ICE targets all around the United States. And you see, this is, on the image on the left is a screenshot from the DHS website today. You can go to dhs.gov / I think it's WOW, worst of worst, and find that website. And it actually has something like 2,500 pages of all of the worst of worst people that they have arrested and are attempting to deport. But the truth, as the truth was then, and if you look at the image on the right, is that most of these worst of the worst committed traffic or immigration violations, which are not actually crimes, if anything at all, right? If they did anything. But these are the new worst of the worst. I mean, literally, that's the title of the website. And where Gitmo was before, it was an anomaly, right? The government can now duplicate to hold all these other worst of worsts forever if they need to. And we've seen that most recently with Alligator Alcatraz, right? Which is thankfully, I think, has closed now. But ICE is still building more facilities in Maryland, near where I live, actually, as we speak. So this is not the end of it. In domestic camps, we've seen outcries about this from many corners, from people who know Gitmo a little too well, right? From those who don't remember that we've operated a camp in Cuba since 2002, and actually poignantly from the Japanese American community, for whom domestic concentration camps is still a living memory. So, and actually, let me just highlight something in this slide. That is, you see the caption on that photo of Alligator Alcatraz that says the Florida Republican Party commissioned Alligator Alcatraz merchandise, t-shirts, caps, and beer coolers. The other three photos on that slide are from the somewhat infamous Guantanamo Bay gift shop. And there was Disney merchandise until we protested, because that's really quite the t-shirt, right? And the other two t-shirts are specific to the task force at Guantanamo that is tasked with guarding the detainees. So this is, glorification of the camp itself in the gift shop. So that is the third circle. You label people and you hold them in camps, and they are no longer even human enough for either domestic or international law to apply for. Now, if you can hold the worst of the worst essentially forever, separated from the public, and made invisible in these camps, you can treat them any way you want, right? And that is what happened in the US government's post-9/11 torture program, where we turned full-blown brutal torture into enhanced interrogation techniques. And I say the US government's post-9/11 torture program because it was not only the CIA. The DoD actually began torturing detainees in our facilities in Afghanistan immediately post-9/11, with untrained interrogators screaming, "When was the last time you saw Bin Laden?" at anyone they rounded up. I mean, you have to laugh at these scenarios sometimes, because otherwise you cry all the time. Right? It's a little funny. While beating them, right? And the CIA, of course, operated their network of secret prisons, the black sites, beginning in 2002. They held over 100 detainees incommunicado. US forces in Iraq tortured and killed detainees and civilians alike, with little to no accountability. And I don't really have time. I could do 45 minutes just on the Haditha massacres, but I encourage you all to look up the New Yorker story from, I think it was published last year, with photographs that I think need to be seen of a massacre of just families and children in Iraq that has seen no accountability. No one's been held responsible for these, if we're in a war, rampant war crimes, if we're not in a war, crimes against humanity, committed by Americans on the ground. And we'll come back to this a little more when we talk about killings. So I'm going to show you a photo of my client, Amar al-Baluchi. I'm giving you all a bit of a trigger warning, because you can choose not to look, you can step out. It's a little bit of a disturbing photo. I think for reasons that I will elaborate on, it is vitally important for us to see these images to a certain extent, right? To witness them. And I share it with Amar's permission, and in fact it was published in The Guardian and the New York Times at his request. It is the first photo that we've ever been able to have declassified from a CIA black site. It was taken in 2003, and it was declassified in 2024. The photo shows Amar nude upon arrival at a black site, although we have redacted it. And at this point, he had been held for 6 months incommunicado, and he's squinting in the photo, you'll see, because his blindfold's just been removed following a very lengthy rendition flight, during which his arms and legs were shackled, his headphones were taped around his head, as I described, his head had been forcibly shaved, and he'd been strapped to the floor. He's very, very thin, because part of the torture at that point was extreme sleep deprivation, shackling to the ceiling, and withholding food. On the right side of that slide is an excerpt from an internal CIA report about Amar's later allegations of torture. It was classified for a very long time. You can see the markings at the very bottom there. It's classified at the top secret level. And I worked for years to get it declassified and into the public realm, and you can find most of it online, actually published by The Guardian in 2022. Because the CIA itself concluded that he had been extra-legally, they're not gonna say illegal, extra-legally rendered to the black sites, which of course would be illegal, by the way, not in this sense. But it is significant that they themselves found it was not legal. And while they wouldn't say outright in this report that he had been tortured, they found that he reasonably believed that he'd been tortured, in part because of what they say here. They say the interrogators are applying some of the measures exuberantly. That's a word for it, right? That's great, exuberantly. They say that they took turns training on him on the technique of walling, which is really just bashing someone's head against a wall over and over again. And they took turns because they got tired. He was much smaller than they were, and they got tired, but they kept going for hours. And he has multiple traumatic brain injuries from that incident. And that look, you can see they placed a stick behind his knees, etc. Right? And this is just a small snapshot of what they did to him, what they did to many detainees at the black sites. Now imagine if Amar was a white European, like French, German, with short, brown or blonde hair, clean shaven, maybe a scary beard. Same photo, same conditions, same torture. Can you imagine if Gitmo or the black sites were filled with white men? Imagine whether they would still be open. Whether we'd still, in 2026, be debating whether these techniques were torture 25 years later. And I will tell you, today, the prosecutors in the 9/11 case, today, the people I stand with in the courtroom at Guantanamo filed a brief saying, wasn't that bad. I mean, it's really badly written. These people are not great writers. But it basically says that. Like, these people are exaggerating. This is how bad it was. It is offensive. And the really tragic effect of our normalization of torture against people in our custody, for whom we use the word terrorist as a dehumanization tactic, and they've never been convicted of anything, let me just be clear about that, is that we have made it politically acceptable for regimes and institutions around the world to use the same language for the same sort of treatment and to benefit from it. So this is, I really hate watching clips of myself, but I think this is interesting because when we talk about how this mentality has spread a little bit, it's a pretty good example. This is what I had to say in 2024 about my client Al-Hassan, another Muslim man that's standing trial at the International Criminal Court on charges including terrorism. And what the ICC prosecution team thought was acceptable treatment for him as a prisoner. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The mic to the,
Oh.
yeah.
I did say to tap dance.
In the words of one prosecution investigator, Mr. Turning finally to the last factor. Contaminated evidence in this case. The torture and coercion affecting the value of the evidence for Article 16.4. In the words of one prosecution investigator, Mr. Al-Hassan's conditions of confinement during ICC interviews were, quote, the same as Guantanamo Bay, end quote. That is a phrase that causes recall, because everyone knows what Guantanamo Bay presents. Torture and arbitrary detention, as found over and over again by the politicians. That statement, caught on recording from the prosecution, was an admission. It was an admission that first, Mr. Al-Hassan was a victim of horrific abuse, torture. And second, that the ICC prosecution team was very aware of. They did not torture Mr. Al-Hassan personally, but they still seek to benefit from the fruits of his torture in a court created in part to prosecute the crime of torture. And this is disallowed in Article 16.4.
I really love the prosecutors' faces when I pan to them. Because they sit right across from you in the courtroom, so it's always a little awkward when you're talking directly about them and they can choose to look at you or not. And they did not. But I lost that argument. Ironically, I won it at Guantanamo for Omar, and got his torture evidence thrown out, but I lost it at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for Al-Hassan, where the facts about his torture and the fact that they had taken statements from him during his torture were incredibly clear-cut. They used torture-acquired evidence to prosecute and convict him, although we got a mixed verdict, which was in some ways. So the fourth circle is calling torture anything but torture, especially when the people doing it are also calling themselves the good guys.
Turning finally to
Oh, no, I don't. For the fifth circle, if you can create the circumstances.
Could you lean a little? It's hard to hear in the back. Could you suggest the mic a little? Sorry.
How's that?
Yeah,
Oh,
much
Beautiful.
I've never been called quiet before. For the fifth circle, if you can create the circumstances to treat people any way you want under the false pretext of a war, you can also indulge in the legalized killing of a war. But this is a war on an amorphous concept. So the enemies are anywhere the government says they are, and anyone the government says they are. The drone program, what we call the targeted killing program, was started during the George W. Bush administration, but really skyrocketed during the Obama administration. So sometimes, I'm told, well, you're very liberal. I am equal opportunity. I have a lot of stones to throw at everyone in all parts of the political spectrum. Bush started the forever war and normalized forever detention. And President Obama broadened the war and normalized extrajudicial murder. Because that is what you call it when you kill someone outside of an actual war zone without legal basis like self-defense. It is murder. These children, who were then 9 and 13, I believe, saw their 67-year-old grandmother blown up in front of them by a US drone in Pakistan, in Waziristan, in their field. They themselves suffered shrapnel injuries, but they had to go out and pick up her body parts for a proper burial. Nabila and her brother Zubair, they came with their father to meet with Congress members and ask why their grandmother, had been killed. They were looking for dignity, right? Nothing's gonna bring her back, but they wanted someone to say they were sorry for what happened. That's what they wanted. They're sorry, we're sorry, we didn't mean to kill her. It was a mistake. What always actually strikes me about civilian victims in these contexts that I represented is their timidity. Most of the time we know that it's not going to be, it will not do to come and shout at us as Americans about killing their families. Nothing terrifies some of these politicians more than people of color shouting at them, or is more likely to get you put on a target list. So they come, literally hat in hand, and beg for recognition. Please understand how painful it is to lose a grandmother. Please, especially in the way we lost her, right? Please understand that she was raising these children, they have many siblings, after their mother died. Please just say sorry so that we can move on. Please tell the world this was not a targeted killing. She was not a target. It was a murder. Maybe not in the first degree, but it was murder nonetheless. And Zubair described how afraid he is of blue skies now, because playing outside because the American drones fly only when the skies are clear. 2 members of Congress showed up to that hearing. A lot of media, that was okay, but only 2 members of Congress. And we tried our best to make sure that the children especially felt seen and heard, but it was a shocking abdication of responsibility. And once again, I want to highlight the race element here. In 2015, as part of that same program, targeted killing program, the United States murdered 2 Western citizens, an American and an Italian, who were being held in a safe house by Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. And as soon as it came to light, a couple of months later, President Obama hot-stepped to the microphone in the media room, and this is what he said on the left. I cannot begin to imagine the anguish of the families. 3rd paragraph, amid grief that is unimaginable, their legacy will endure. Pakistani men, women, and children whose lives they touched and made better. Now make no mistake, okay? Loporto and Weinstein were good people and doubtless did good work, and their deaths were a tragedy. But what about Mama Bibi? What about that grandmother, right? What about the Pakistani children she was raising? And her widower son who depended on her? What about the family who had to comb the field for her body parts and children who had to stop going to school and take care of their younger siblings because she was no longer there? What about her legacy? And then the 2nd paragraph, on behalf of the United States government, I offer my deepest apologies to the families. With Pakistanis killed? Nothing of the sort. And so on the right, that's what me and my colleagues said at the time. I got a lot of hate mail for this one, but we're talking about calling things by their names, and the word for this is hypocrisy. The same thing happened when my client Faisal bin Ali Jabbar from Yemen, whose brother-in-law was a vocal anti-Al-Qaeda imam, someone who actually maybe should have partnered with in talking about national security, he was killed in a drone strike that hit a family wedding. So these are the pictures of Faisal. And on the left are the pictures is the story from when Faisal came to Washington to try and meet members of Congress. And he was able to meet with a number of members, but as you see from the headline, he was given no answers, right? No answers as to why it happened, how it happened, was it a missed target, what was it, right? And on the right was the final disposition, is he actually ended up suing just for like $1, just to try and get an apology or a statement from the DOJ. And DOJ said, absolutely not. That's the last line of that excerpt from the article. And actually, the picture in the middle is just one that I put in because it's very sweet. He spent a few days on the Hill telling this story that was very traumatizing for him over and over and over and over again. All he wanted to do during his evening off was play with my then infant daughter, Sabara, who's here today. So, we just left him, with her, and that was his way of sort of coping with what he was going through during those days. But let me be clear, right? Faisal's brother-in-law was murdered. Momana Bibi was murdered. Like, that is what happened to them. Now, how has this developed over time? Well, our murders of Venezuelan men on boats, facilitated by the CIA, is the direct result of this program. It is just an extension of this same program. Right? And here are some of the faces, right, of the people we have killed. Do you know who they are? Do you have any information? Have any of you heard any information, proving that they are in fact related to drug trafficking? Anything? I work for DOD, I haven't heard anything. And if they are, do you have any information proving that they pose an immediate threat to the United States? Such that they have to be preemptively killed without judicial process? No, right? They are, to us, the nameless, faceless brown men. And a few names we do have, not at all publicized here in the US, by the way, are from an intensive investigation by a Latin American group of journalists published in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago. And you see an excerpt from that report in below, where they said, really the purpose was, well, first of all, they say, look, like, you're destabilizing communities that are already facing enormous challenges, which again would seem to me to be contrary to national security. But it's also just putting names and faces to people who certainly are now not fans of the United States, right? And not that they have to love the United States, but I have never understood what this does for what this kind of operation does for national security. And does this look familiar? It looks a little bit like the first slide I showed you with my clients, right? Pictures of brown men all next to each other. You can't tell the difference among any of them, right? This discrepancy of treatment, right? Brown faces all next to each other, is sort of at the heart of what I call national security theater. And that's the next circle. Creating the conditions by which the government can otherwise separate, detain, and kill people of color is not national security, it is theater. And it is racist theater at that. If there is one takeaway for all of you from this evening, I almost want to create a Pavlovian conditioned response when you hear the phrase national security in news or anywhere else. No phrase has been so weaponized and generalized over the past generation of national security. You know how the kids say, that's so fire for everything, right kid? That's so fire. I promised I would work a BTS reference into this presentation, and I will now. Modern poets, performers, and cultural ambassadors of BTS, in one of the songs on their recent album, Arirang, joke about the ubiquitous use of that phrase, saying everything lit is fire, everything big is fire. The same thing applies to that phrase, national security, except that it's our government turning every power play into national security. The ideology of national security has gone through many iterations over the 20th century, starting with more traditional physical defense of borders to more proactive defense against foreign powers and ideologies. And this is where sort of propaganda wars began during the Cold War, especially, and then sort of pivots to conflicts with non-state actors after 9/11. And we can debate what it has actually meant over time, and whether it is a helpful or problematic way to frame things pre-9/11. But when talking about it post 9/11, it has to be understood in context. 9/11 caught the US by surprise, right? I'm happy to tell you at some point about all the intelligence failures involved, and maybe some of you know about all of them. But aside from the tragedy of it, it was excruciatingly humiliating for the United States government. And we see that, like, currently in the courtroom at Guantanamo, when FBI investigators come down and testify about it, about how still they feel the humiliation of having missed both the science of 9/11 that was going to happen. So not only did they have to look for the perpetrators, understandably, right, we just had a major terrorist attack, but it became pretty quickly that bin Laden was in fact not going to be caught. And so they had to be seen to do something, right? And this is when national security became farce, became racist theater. This is where you start to see the rise of domestic surveillance, first against mosques and American Muslim communities under Bush, and then under Obama, a digital dragnet of our communications, with the idea being promoted, right, by the president that if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. You have nothing to worry about. The government's monitoring your emails, monitoring your phone calls, and certainly not if you're not a person of color. There's some pushback, there's some initial outcry, but then we got comfortable again, normalized things. And in recent years, we've heard about the arming of police with military weapons categorized as national security. And you see that middle photo on the top is a photo from the BLM protests in 2020 where I was a legal observer, and it says demilitarize the police. Right? We know who the most frequent targets of police around the country are, Black Americans, and other people of color, but historically Black Americans. We heard about the violent suppression of protesters as national security. And you see that's a picture from Lincoln Memorial, right? With the National Guard fanned out. This is again 2020. We heard about the asinine building of a wall on the southern border as national security. We've heard about scanning visitors' social media for posts criticizing the president as national security. Recently that's become more generalized, but it started as just against people from what the president charmingly called shithole countries. Everything lit is fire. Everything the government doesn't like is national security. And by sheer coincidence, most of the government's targets are non-white. Now, as a side note, we're going to get to the more generalized application of this, but and as a quick side note, right? Those who can't reconcile racism with our first Black president, I was a fan too, back in the day. I refer you back to the exponential expansion of the drone program against exclusively non-white communities. And the militarization of the police was an Obama administration phenomenon. By sheer coincidence, everything the government deems national security builds executive power. And it normalizes marginalization and even violence against the groups that are seen as the government's targets. Which is why, for example, the horrific attack on the Islamic Center here last week received comparably less national media coverage than other tragic attacks on places of worship here and in the UK and other places around the world. So I want you all to twitch a little bit and start reading deeper every time you hear that phrase national security in the media, and especially out of the mouths of any administration officials. So we're starting to slip a little faster here. Have you heard of the concept of the slippery slope in law? And lawyers love to talk about slippery slopes. And the concept of the slippery slope is once you cross that line, once you engage in one violation of the law, it just opens the whole world up, right? You slip very fast down into the abyss. We're starting to slip faster now. The circles are going to go faster. When you begin generalizing national security to more and more groups and reducing it to theater, you have to find a way to hide the bodies, literally and figuratively. The government has been able to rely on our indifference through most of this, right? But for the people who dig, like me, I have to dig up to represent my client, and a lot of other people, there is this stamp. Top secret, right? I'm a top secret security clearance. What does that get me? It gives me the ability to tell you, for example, that whatever you think you know about the CIA torture program, there is so much more in 2026 that you have never been told because it is still classified, right? One example. I still have to keep the secrets of the US government, so which I can say without a doubt, have that stamp, not because of security, but because we are embarrassed, and that is illegal. You cannot stamp something classified because it is illegal, but we do it all the time. Along those lines, over the years, we've seen that legal justification for the killing programs are classified. There we go. This is on the left, the memo legally justifying the killing of American citizen Anwar al-Awlaki from 2011, I believe, and it's got large sections redacted. So it was released, some parts were useful, but you can't actually put together a lot of the legal justification, right, because so many parts of it are redacted. Important parts of the civilian casualty reports from the drone program are classified. Information pertaining to the alleged involvement of Saudi Arabia in the 9/11 attacks is classified. A government that so easily weaponizes state secrets and classification requires, in my mind, requires more scrutiny, not less. And yet, less is what we've given them over the years, right? Which leads to the image on the right, which some of you may recognize as the grossly over-redacted pages of the Epstein files. So for Circle 7, the government puts in place an overclassification system, which really the right word is not even secrecy, it's cover. All right. Circle number 8, we're almost there. Once you have in place a system where the government can wage war, detain, kill, cover up their actions against people they call terrorists, we've slipped all the way down the slope, right? The government has realized that anyone they claim is a terrorist can be treated in all the ways I just outlined. And here are some recent examples of people the government now calls terrorists. Keith Porter, Renee Good, Francesca Albanese, Alex Pretty, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Antifa, and Antifa, whoever they may be. I hope we are all anti-fascist, by the way. Just leave that there. Just leave that there for you. And once we are at this point, the word terrorist starts to be weaponized against all of us. Let me show you something that if any of you have seen this, please raise your hand, because it was released to very little fanfare for good reason. This is the 2026 memorandum on counterterrorism that was released just earlier this month. Okay? And in that paragraph, the whole document is appalling, but that paragraph, the top paragraph on the right, you'll see it says, prioritize the rapid identification and neutralization of violent secular political groups whose ideology is anti-American, radically pro-transgender, any anarchist. I'm not sure how he, plucked words from the pile to put them in there. But then it says, what actually takes it out of the realm of farce and makes it real is that last paragraph, which says, if you hurt Americans or are planning to hurt Americans, we will find you and we will kill you. Right? And you know from this administration that is not an empty threat. So this is great, right? And we've come almost full circle from conflating terrorists and combatants in the war to tarring all dissent and non-conformity with the regime as terrorism. And this is the 8th circle. As we watch the demonization of universities and law firms and companies who refuse to conform with the regime's agendas and the accompanying crackdown on even the freedom of speech, this is the circle we're sort of currently navigating. Let's do something quaint. Let's examine the legal definition of terrorism. Now, there's no universally accepted definition of terrorism under international law, but international law does recognize, and most domestic codes recognize, the following attributes as key. The perpetration or threatened perpetration of a criminal act, i.e. murder, kidnapping, torture, hostage taking. With, that's a picture of an ICE vehicle at Guantanamo, by the way. With the intent to spread fear among the population, creating a public danger, or to coerce a national or international authority. And I'm sure you all are familiar with the statement. And here you see some of the, on this slide, you see some of the effects of that fear, that terror, on those targeted and those who are trying to avoid being targeted, which to some extent should include all of us. The reality is now, like, we all have reason to fear. Remember the 2026 counterterrorism strategy? Conflating anti-Americanism with pro-transgender and Antifa, all under the banner of counterterrorism. We are all at risk. This is the circle that we're all in right now. And finally, the last circle, which is really just off the slippery slope into the darkness, is forever wars. We started this game with Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda and associated forces with Al-Qaeda, and we are playing the same game now with Venezuela and Iran, and at home with the memorandum that you've seen. National security is threatened by terrorism, and the only answer is war, which is contrary to the Constitution, now run almost exclusively by the executive. State Department and diplomatic corps have been gutted. Intelligence officials who disagreed with the regime are being purged. And the Department of Defense has been rebranded with its own euphemism for the purpose of consolidating power under an increasingly fascist regime. And when we use that word fascist, it is not a euphemism. We cannot be in the business of euphemism anymore. We have to use it clinically, as advised by Ashis Nandy. And right now, according to this, we are sliding quickly into an era of modern fascism. So what do we do? Right, what do we do about this? The answer cannot be nothing. And actually, there are many people, including many of you, like fighting on many different fronts. Some are litigating, some are registering new voters, some are whistleblowing, and sometimes some are paying the ultimate cost. They're in the streets making their voices heard. But there are two things that every one of us can do in the name of dissent that would, without a doubt, right? Having watched this from Guantanamo Bay for a very long time, without a doubt, would collectively start. Collectively, we all have to live this. Very animated. Collectively start to roll back from where we are now. The first is pay attention. You can see now, hopefully, the trajectory of illegal state violence from outward and seemingly focused to inward and more generalized, beyond recognition. And if you think you will be untouched, no matter your background or your socioeconomic status, you are wrong. There was that famous meme after a quote that went around after President Biden was elected that was like, we can all finally go back to brunch, right? Because we hadn't learned our lesson that the bad times didn't start with the current administration. It's a symptom. It's a product, in a way, of it, using the tools literally forged for him by our inattention to previous executive violations. No more brunches, ever. I'm kidding. Go to brunch. Go to brunch and rest and take care of yourselves. But as someone who has watched the cracks in democracy from Guantanamo Bay, I ask you, please don't do it to the exclusion of paying attention. Watch the press conferences. Listen to when you're using these words. Watch the victims' videos to the extent that you can handle it. Read the articles from researched and investigated sources from many different sources, not just the New York Times, not at all the Washington Post, right? Many different, international media as well. And understand the details of the policies being enacted. And, Hannah Arendt once said, actually, that evil comes from a failure to think. And this level of government control is undemocratic, and it depends on an uninformed electorate. So pay attention. And second, once you pay attention, your second act of dissent for every one of us is to call things by their proper names. Terrorism, combatants, camps, concentration camps, torture, murder, racist, cover-ups, dissent, fascist. We want to go to brunch on Sunday, not protest, right? Because the decision makers are using these soothing words that make us feel like we can look away, at least until they block my car on the way to daycare drop-off, shoot me in the face, call me a terrorist. Let me be clear, Renee Good was one of the people who paid attention. And she did show up. And her murder is the product of a rights-destroying system that we have allowed to grow. And it is now very late indeed to be fighting back against the national security beast, but it is not too late. It's never too late. And so we begin by taking action to watch and listen and think, and then to call things by their names, which is to speak the truth, which is, I think, the most powerful form of dissent. So I want to just end on an uplifting note, a little bit of it. These are photos of my clients in lighter moments. That's Nabila and I having just ordered her a lemonade in the hotel room. She had not had a lemonade before. This was very exciting. Room service was a whole concept. It was very fun. I love room service too, so it was exciting for the both of us. As on the right are Amar, my current client, and I try not to laugh during a photograph. We had a client meeting in court. We don't usually meet in court, and when we are in court, we're in more formal clothes. But we were in the courtroom, and I just joked that he was blending in at the wall, and all they'd see was his beard. And he was trying not to laugh because he didn't like to laugh before he was supposed to be serious. And then in the middle at the bottom is Faisal. During our rounds of Congress, we ended up in an elevator with an actual astronaut. And he was so excited. He could not, he's, you were talking about how the US government killed his brother-in-law, but he was like, so we had to take a photo for him to take home. And then on top is the first tomato ever grown at the camps at Guantanamo Bay. I'm not going to give you more details than that, but it's the first tomato. I ate it, it was delicious. I actually thought I ate it a little bit of it too. No person is ever just one thing, right? None of us are either the worst thing we've done or the worst thing that has happened to us. So keep that. Finally, the very last most absurd example of euphemism I can give you is my second home at Camp Justice. The fake court complex at Guantanamo Bay set up with special rules just for the Muslim men who are prosecuted there, with rules written for the purpose of executing. Camp Justice, my friends. All right, let me stop there. I'm sure I've gone horrifically over. Very sorry. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
And moving. Thank you so much. My name is Prashant. I'm a faculty member of the economics department. I co-organize this, and I'm going to moderate the Q&A. Just a few ground rules. Keep it to a question. I'm sure you have tons of questions for our speaker, so keep it to a question. Comments are welcome as long as they're short. And I'm going to prioritize young voices here because you guys are at a university. This is an amazing opportunity for you to engage with speaker like Alka and ask your questions. But definitely non-students are also welcome to participate. Typically students need some time to warm up before they begin to ask questions. But I'm definitely going to ask you guys to speak up and get some questions. So if you can raise your hand, whoever has a question, our student helpers will get these mics to you. Yeah, please. Say your name, who you are, and then ask a question.
Hi, my name is Dishita. Sorry, that was extremely loud. Well, my question is, in a world where injustice is not just so prevalent, but also glamorized by, current administrations, past administrations, probably every administration, what more can we do besides being informed? Information is power, but what is our civic duty besides being educated?
Well, I would say being informed is obviously the first step, but talking about that information is the second step, right? And that's sort of what I'm getting at in that, inform yourselves, but go out, speak to your fellow students, speak to your peers. I was speaking last night to well, how do we talk to in the Indian American community, right? There are a lot of people who straddle the political spectrum. How do we argue with our elders about some of that? The key is to do it, is to not just be comfortable and listen to, the misinformation coming from people we might love, people we might respect, but to challenge them on it, right? To say, no, here are the facts I have about it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and look, I know that everyone says this, but please vote. Please go and register to vote and actually vote, right? I know, I know the system is corrupt. The electoral college is ridiculous. It has all the wrong priorities. All of that is a function of slavery. All of that. But your vote matters in a lot of places. Please go and vote. Write. Okay? It doesn't matter whether you're a student. In fact, sometimes the most powerful writing I've read has been from students who've been affected by some of these policies. Write for your student newsletter. Write for, send it out to the New York Times. Your writing's gonna be better than theirs recently. Promise. Send it out. Find places where you can write about your perspectives, right? It sounds so trite, but really make your voices heard. People around you, your small circle and your big circle.
Great. Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Bree. I was just wondering where or how in your life did you decide that this was what you were passionate about? I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I just have family that is so hardworkers in this field, and I talked to them about it, and I was just like, why are so strong, couldn't do this. But I just wanted to ask, like, how did you decide that this was the kind of lawyer that you wanted to be?
Well, thank you for asking. You know, I came at it from a different angle. I think I always knew I wanted to do international law. And by the time I finished high school and was on my way to college, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, I knew I wanted to do international law, and I had interacted through various summer programs, etc., with people who were then helping to set up the International Criminal Court, which was brand new, right? I'm dating myself now. I graduated in 1999. But they were, you know, negotiating the Rome Statute. The criminal tribunals had been somewhat successful and had come out and like really built this body of jurisprudence. And I was like, I want to do that. Right? I met one of the first female prosecutors at the ICC, and I was like, this is like, you know, really inspirational. I decided never ever to be a prosecutor, but she is still an inspirational figure. And so I thought when I specialized in public international law and the law of war and the crossroads between the law of war and human rights, because that's a really interesting subject actually, like where they mix together, what the hierarchy is and all that. It was with the idea that I would be helping with international crimes, right? Like genocide abroad and crimes against humanity abroad. And through sort of a circuitous path, I ended up litigating against the US government. And so I would say I started out always with an interest for the subject matter, for the war crimes, for the really high crimes, right? That was sort of always my interest in getting to the bottom of justice mechanisms for those things. And it doesn't always look like prosecutions, right? Accountability is not always just prosecution. Accountability can be transparency. Accountability can look like a truth and reconciliation, because there are many, many, many forms of accountability. But it was in getting accountability for those kinds of crimes. And I always thought my trajectory was, I'm going to go work for the ICC one day. And instead, I ended up working for, is more details than you need really. But I ended up working for a UK organization that represents Guantanamo detainees. They asked me to take on, I was in DC, they asked me to take on some of the direct representation of the clients who needed nuclear release. And I sort of fell into it that way. And I ended up, like very early on, I was like, I am actually doing what I wanted to do. I really never thought I would be litigating against my own government. And so there's a weird tension there.
Great. Let's come to this side. So let's go there, and then we'll go there. By the way, it's amazing that students are asking all these questions.
Yes.
I'm so proud of you
Thank you.
guys. This is great. So,
Hello, my name is Landon Getsko, and I'm curious, you did mention like a few different ways for younger people to get involved with expressing their voices and whatnot. And I was curious, is there like any additional ways? Like I've been involved in a few of the No King protests, and I was interested if you had anything or any advice similar to that.
so can we take one more question, and then you can
Of course.
club them up if that's okay? So let's get your question as well. Where's the mic? Yeah, right here. Yeah. Just down this side.
Thank you. My name is Nico, and my question is, how do you navigate just knowledge of, you know, having to legally argue for human rights within a legal system that is designed to be ineffectual
Yeah.
for, you know, certain people's rights? How do you navigate that tension? Do you think that there's a point at which perhaps younger people in organizing should think about extra legality?
Yeah, great question. Great question as well. So with regards to what more young people can do, obviously there are the obvious ones that I mentioned, but what I've seen more and more, and perhaps you've given me an example of it, I teach at Penn as well, so I've seen a little bit, is more and more students kind of seeing what's happening that's affecting them directly, right, in your own universities, and you know, what's happening to your own professors, what's happening to your own work, like you're targeting with what we've seen with the encampments and whatever protest, whatever it is you're protesting, right? I will represent you. I can't represent you, but you know what I mean. but I have seen more student organization, right? Like literally establishing new organizations and sort of hierarchies of student leaders to take issues to the administrations and to sort of represent the various communities that are being affected among the student population. And that is not, I mean, obviously student organizations have always existed, but I have not seen them in such a proactive way pop up and, you know, I will say at Penn, be super inclusive, right? And like reach out to pull people in, get the spectrum of what their views are, find consensus, and in a way that is more sophisticated than I see certainly in our, you know, nation's highest political structures, bring them to leadership. And sometimes you get rewarded for that, and sometimes you don't, and them's the breaks, right? But the point is to do it. Because when you do it, someone has to listen to you. And if they don't like it, sometimes they're in a position to kick you out of their offices. But if you don't do it, if you don't say it, you don't form the organizations, and you don't give other people this idea that maybe they have agency as well, right? Students have a lot of agency. Then they don't hear it, and nothing happens, and they steamroll you, right? And then you find after maybe 4 years, maybe 8 years, whatever, that you haven't actually said anything, and some of your rights have been stripped away. So that's a very long answer, but I would say find the people you have community with, right, for the same purpose, for the same causes, and then reach out beyond that and pull other people in, right, and build bigger and bigger and bigger tents. And when you have the courage to do it, then you give everybody else kind of a little more courage to speak up. It's just like the first student who speaks, right? Everybody else now wants to talk, which is awesome. Thank you.
Second question.
Yes, so the second question is really, it is a tough one, and it's one that I've gotten a few times, right? Like, look, the military commission system is corrupt. It was built to cover up CIA torture. It has wonky rules of evidence that would never fly in federal courts. They change what is classified from day to day, right? Something I said literally 2 weeks ago, something I said 2 weeks ago in court got the red light, and the prosecutors were like, I don't know. We just got a message saying, because they have classification authorities listening in from outside the program, I don't know why it's classified. And I was like, well, yeah, I said the same thing 6 months ago, right? Same thing in open court. Why is it now classified? And they're like, well, we say it's classified, and the government can do that, right? They get to say what's classified. Okay. So look, yes, the entire system is corrupt. How do I square it? There are very few tools at my disposal within this, like, really oppressive system. One of them is sitting in a room with my clients, okay? These guys were, and this is where, like, you get into direct representation. It's like, and on a very personal human level, it doesn't matter what I can do for him. What matters is that someone is coming to Guantanamo Bay to sit with him, to be with him, and to say, I'm in your corner, right? I'm on your side. I don't know if I can do anything for you. I don't know if I can get you out, but I can maybe take some sumosas down for him and sit with him and talk about Bollywood. You didn't even say that, but that's number one. Okay, that's the number one thing. Just on a human level, just like make them feel popular. The second thing is, over time, right? I've been in this job now for much longer than I ever expected to be, but 11 years. Okay, just representing Amar, just Amar in the 9/11 case. Over time, all those classification issues, they work in my favor as well, right? A lot of the documents that I put up today, or that I've alluded to, we got declassified over time. Like, we found not loopholes, we're not trying to, like, violate our clearances, but like, we found the ways to get the things declassified and get them out into the public domain, right? Problem is, and I don't fault anyone for this, but we are now like 4 wars ahead, right? And we're still fighting the one back then. And so I don't know how many people care what happened to Omar al-Bashir in 2003. And some of it is shocking, look through headlines, but like, to make people care, one of the ways to do that is to show how it affects things now. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay.
We have time for maybe 2 more quick questions. And we can go, sorry, okay, I'm gonna go Varun and then David. you guys can be the closest. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark, and thanks for the talk. It was great. I wanted to ask with respect to the 9 layers that you spoke about earlier. At what layer do you think universal apathy comes into play by these like injustices that have been like mechanized and institutionalized? And when do you think they get amplified so that people can stay in power for longer and continue to abuse the system?
Circle 2, worst of the worst. I think that's where it came in, because it was such a horrific thing to do, right? And there was this flashpoint moment. You probably don't remember 2002.
I was born.
Okay. You're not supposed to tell me that. You're supposed to just shake your head or something. Don't tell me that. But okay, so there was this moment. There was this moment in 2002 when we saw those images, right? Where there was horror, right? Like there was discussion about it in the Security Council. There were media headlines from around the world saying the U.S. What is the U.S. doing? Are they opening a concentration? That was the phrase used. Are they opening a concentration camp for these men? Like who are they? We know who they are. It was huge like outcry, and it was really the rebranding that inspired the apathy, right? That, okay, well, it's far away, we can't get to it, and it's far enough away that we don't have to care about it. It's not in my backyard, it's not a prison in Indiana, right? It's in Cuba, and they're only taking the worst people, and it's only like 16 people. It grew to 800, over 800. But there's only 16 people, and 9/11 was still fresh. And I think it's important to keep in mind that certain decisions, right, are understandable in a way immediately post-crisis. But then as time passes, become unjustifiable, right? As we know more, we learn more, but then by then we realize, oh, but like this is how we keep power, right? So I would say that was the time, that was the moment when the apathy really we started normalizing, it's only the worst, it's only the worst, it's only the worst, so we're telling ourselves this. And no more, don't worry, no more images came out after those, right? They learned their lesson. You saw actually, very quickly, you saw a recent example of that when the first images came out from the first migrants taken to Guantanamo, early last year in 2025. There was, they made a mistake because they wanted to publicize their misdeeds. And they took photographs of the men taken to Guantanamo, the new migrants, on the tarmac. And they were pretty horrific photographs. I mean, they looked like our rendition photographs that are still classified, actually. And there was a little bit of that flare-up again, similar to what happened in 2002. Like, oh my God, like we are now, what are we doing now? We're adding a population of people. But you maybe remember how quickly it went away, right? No more photographs, no more photographs. And don't forget, these are only the worst of the worst. Those people went very quickly up on the DHS website. And you can find them there today. So that's what I would say.
Great. David, do you mind if I take a question offline? I would like to wrap this up because I know some of our students were at week 9. You guys had exams to prepare for, things to do, life to live. Just going to say thank you really quickly to Alka. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank Mohan Trivedi, who really supported us, and this would not be happening without him. I want to thank Sitara for exposing her mom to BTS. So would not have gotten that great reference without you, so thanks for that. And finally, I want to thank all the students who are here. Really, this is your house, and your engagement and participation and presence is what makes this a university that we're also proud of. So really, you guys are amazing, and thanks for being here. So thanks everyone.
Because this is the longest either my daughter or my brother have ever sat and watched. Thank you.